Marauders here, Marauders there, Marauders everywhere. Hello and welcome to the Commando cast. With you as always, I'm Andrew. This is episode 27, and today we're talking about the Enfys Nest Marauder. Not only why this guy is popping up everywhere, but actually if this guy, he, she, it, them, they, whatever it is any good. Right, so this week in Destiny, I was able to get out to 2 tournaments. Went to the Gongai tournament on Saturday, which was a 4-round tournament, and then went to the Monday Night Dice tournament, which was just an 8-man, 3-round tournament. But I saw a lot of interesting decks at both, and obviously, you know, the subject of today is the Enfys Nest Marauder. He was popping up in a lot of different decks. But first, let's run down what I played. So I played Tarkin Snoke on Saturday. Ended up winning the tournament with that. That deck is pretty brutal. I was running the all trooper supports package. I was not running the fists because Amy was playing the Watto Talzin Watt deck, and I wanted her to have that. So I was playing just megas, the sniper team, Imperial officer, conscript squad, and then a couple support or a couple upgrades. So it worked pretty well. I mean, it pretty much does Tarkin Snoke things, right? If that deck's not hitting for 8 to 10 round 1, you're doing something wrong, right? So so round 1 actually is on the Commando, is on the Dice Commando channel. It's up a couple days ago. I was playing against 5 Die Jedi. That was a really bad matchup for my opponent because I knew that he would have to work in order to get himself any sort of mitigation and just to ramp, because obviously with Allies of Necessity plot, he's starting without any money. So you knew his whole turn was going to be spent using Yoda to earn money. So I mulliganed hard for supports, and I just focused and generated the money I needed and just overwhelmed board state. I don't think I did as much damage turn 1 as you would normally look for from that deck, but the board state that I had built was far superior, so he got steamrolled there. Round 2 was Dooku Talzin. That's actually available to watch on the T3 Gaming cast. I believe that went up 2 days ago. Symbio's channel. Not much to say there. Dooku Talzin's in a really rough spot right now. The Fear and Dead Min play with that, I think, still really strong in 3 wides, but versus Tarkin Snoke, it didn't have much of a chance. In round 3, then I played Symbio from T3. He was playing an interesting deck. He had a Elite Luke, single die Qui-Gon, and then, of course, he was running the upgrade that lets you turn your character into Elite, right, the ability. That didn't work out great for him. I was able to, again, just kind of punch through the damage. Obviously, the shields that deck generates is worth something, but because Tarkin and Snoke can just generate constant damage over and over and over again, Symbio wasn't able to keep the shields he needed on Qui-Gon, and that was pretty much it. The final then was an interesting deck. Very good player, and I think he's actually onto something with this deck. So he was playing Wat Tambor Palpatine, which we've seen on time and time again, except that he was only playing single die Palp and instead was using Lightsaber Mastery. I said before that I think single die Palp is actually not that bad because you're not really looking for the damage. I mean, really what that deck does is it just turtles up and then tries to Force Storm Explode on you, which is certainly what he did to people throughout the tournament. I mean, you are losing the 2 focus die on Palpatine for sure, but I think it's not that big. Plus, again, you can play that's the 3-cost upgrade that lets you make him Elite, and then actually gives him another health as well as the other die. So that deck was really cool. Ended up pulling that one out and taking the tournament there. On Monday, from Monday Night Dice, I ran up against an Enfys Nest Marauder deck with no allegiance. I was playing Phasma Troopers that night. Got rolled pretty hard. It was just a lot of health to cut through. We got down to only a couple health left on Enfys, but then he was just able to took out both my characters at one time with an act of cruelty. So very, very good deck there. Eric, who was always playing, Eric the Viking, we call him on the channel. He ended up going to win that tournament. Next I played Mike with a Qui-Gon Satine and pretty much rolled him hard. The fast aggro was just too much for that deck. He lost Satine round 1 and really couldn't fight his way back. And then in round 3, I was playing against another Allies of Necessity deck. This one was an Afra deck. So it was Afra, Grievous, Sentinel Messenger, Battle Droid with Allies of Necessity. And you wouldn't think it would work, but it worked pretty well, actually. he was able to somehow get a bunch of money turn 1 and 2, and he got his board state really to about the same that it would have been otherwise. I was pretty impressed with the way that deck worked. Might have to take a look at that. I haven't been all that impressed with the Afro decks in the current meta, but the extra health that brings, plus the fact that you can play the messenger and a battle droid for some soaking is pretty good. So I ended up losing that game as well. He was just able to blitz out, which is too much health for my Phasma troopers. So that's pretty much how it went. Like I said, Amy, she went 3-1. She was playing the Elite Watto, Talzin, and Wat Tambor deck. She was able to go 3-1 on Saturday as well. She even had a hard time pulling Entourage. She just couldn't get it out in many of her games and was still able to do pretty well. So Wat Tambor is pretty strong. Look for that deck going forward. I don't think that's news to anybody, but that deck's going to continue to be very strong, I think. All right, so Enfys Marauder, right? This little guy, I've just seen him popping up everywhere. And I think the reason is because he opens up a lot of cool deck building possibilities, right? So we're kind of in the phase of the meta now where I think people pretty much know what works and what doesn't. People are kind of starting to branch off and expand and try to check out some new stuff. So just to bring up to speed, so Enfys Marauder, he's an 8-point neutral character with 9 health, which is pretty good. Character Scavenger Scoundrel. He has a 1 melee for 1, a 2 melee for 1, a +2 melee, a shield, and then a 2 money for 1. His real exciting, probably the thing that I think everybody is attracted to, is that you can include up to 1 villain card and up to 1 hero card in your deck, following all deck building restrictions. And then the ability that is making him really start to stand out as people finally remember to do this is that after you resolve his die showing a cost, so the 1 melee, the 2 melee, or the 2 resource, you may deal 1 indirect damage to an opponent. So the attractive thing, of course, is that he enables cheating, right? You can play a hero deck and bring some villain cards or vice versa. And what's kind of cool is that with him, you don't really know necessarily what that card, or if they're playing 2 of them, what those cards are going to be. But I wanted to kind of harken back to the value episode, which we did several months ago at this point, and kind of talk about the Enfys Marauder from a value standpoint. So just remember Destiny values. We have the equivalent value list, which is card from hand is roughly equal to a discard, roughly equal to disrupt, which is equal to a resource, which is important, which is equal to a damage, which is of course equal to a shield. Now indirect we know is slightly less than a damage, so that's slightly less than 1. And removal, the removal of a die, we determine to be roughly the cost of 1. The act itself of removing a die is roughly equal to 1. So when you apply that to the Enfys Marauder, let's look at his pay sides, keeping in mind that you're dealing the indirect. So I don't think it's a huge secret that the 1 melee for 1 is bad value. Now granted, you're getting 1, and you're not just doing 1 direct, but you're also doing 1 indirect. But remember that 1 indirect is less than 1. So because you're not only giving a die away, or using a die, removing a die from the pool, whatever you want to say, and you're paying the resource, the 1 for 1 is a poor value, right? You're getting less out of it than you're putting into it. The 2 for 1 is a decent value because you're getting, look at the Kylo, like you'd be, like many people and many times are okay paying 2 for 1. Right, like the Kylo's 2 for 1 side, obviously you'd rather not pay for it, but you'll still resolve it if you have to. And the fact that you're then getting an indirect out of this on top of that makes the 2 for 1 a pretty decent value, right? You're paying 1, you're losing the die, which is equal to 1, and you're getting 2.8-ish value out of it. So that's decent value. What's really great value is his 2 for 1 money side. The 2 for 1 money side is really what I'm starting to see people really try to use him for. Because think about it. If you have a character with a resource on it, you're giving up a die to gain that resource. In this case, what you're doing is you are paying a resource to gain 2 resources, so it's a net 1, and then you're dealing the indirect on top of it, right? So if you really think about that, that is a great value because the 1 for 1 you're normally getting anyway, right? Then you also have the 1, so you're paying 1, you're trading the die for the 1, and then you're getting the indirect on top of it. So really the indirect in this case is a free value, whereas for the 2 for 1, it wouldn't always be quite that way. So we have poor value. In fact, I would argue that on the Enfys Marauder, the 1 for 1 is really effectively a blank, like you're gonna reroll that one. Probably gonna keep the 2 for 1 in the pool, and you're certainly gonna resolve the 2 for 1 money. So again, he enables cheating, he lets you bring into the board. a lot of other cards, which enables pretty awesome deck building possibilities. The other thing that is pretty obvious with this guy that we're seeing a lot of the decks use, right? We're seeing like the Yoda Marauders and other stuff like that, is just the Scoundrel package, the Entourage, Fickle Mercenaries, and the Hired Muscle. If you have two of these guys on the board, plus you have Entourage and maybe it tutors out a Hired Muscle or something like that, all of a sudden Entourage is hitting for 4, which is pretty darn scary, right? So I don't think I need to talk too much into that. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. But the fact that you're using this guy for money, which is his best die side, it's his best value side, and it really helps you ramp into one of the best support packages in the game, is really why I think this guy's starting to pop up and be an attractive option. An upgrade I do want to talk about real quick, and I haven't seen people playing and I think is really good for this guy, is the Black Sun Blaster Pistol. So I'll grant you, mixed damage is not great, and mixed damage is actually even less than great when you think about it from like the Enfys Nest point of view, right? So Enfys Nest has the power action where you can resolve up to 3 Scoundrel die showing the same symbol for free. So in that case, if you have mixed damage, especially on your Scoundrel die, that's not a good thing because then you can't resolve them all if they're pay sides. However, the Black Sun Pistol has no pay sides. It has the 2-gun, and then it has the special, which is deal 2 indirect, which you're dealing a ton of anyway because of the Marauders indirect side, and then you can deal a damage to a character. And this sucker has redeploy when it's on a neutral character. I think the Black Sun Blaster Pistol needs to start going in some of the double Marauder decks for sure. All right, so let's go real quick. I have 3 decks that I've made, and I will also be posting these to the SW Destiny DB under the Commando Cast tag. I'll link to the decks in the description of this video. But first, let's talk about really the obvious one, the one that FFG gave us, which is Enfys Nest Marauder, Enfys Nest, and Enfys Nest Marauder using the No Allegiance plot. Now, No Allegiance is not in the same set, so you could technically argue that that's not what they were giving us. In addition, Enfys and the 2 Marauders add up to 30 if you're playing Enfys single die, which you have to. So you don't really need No Allegiance because technically the -1 on No Allegiance brings you down to 29. But the fact that it gives each one of these guys an extra health is crazy, right? These guys with No Allegiance is 33 bleeping health. That is incredible, right? I realize you're giving up the die, but it's pretty strong. The other really attractive thing about this deck is you're bringing 4 hero cards and 4 villain cards in addition to everything else to the table. That's pretty good, right? A lot of people were playing Kira just because of like in the Han Kira phase, right? You never quite knew what you were going to get out of a Han Kira deck. And it's the same thing in here. You're never quite sure what they're going to be packing with Enfys and the Marauders. And that gives you a huge advantage. What cards am I going to see? Likely you're going to see easy pickings. That one's pretty sure. The villain cards I think are pretty flexible. Flee the Scene's pretty popular for hero cards, but you can really go a lot of ways. So I've got the deck list here, just a sample deck list. So let me just go down from the top. So obviously we're playing Enfys Nest, 2 of the Marauders, No Allegiance, and then I have us on Theed because they're neutral characters. Again, if you get in the point where your Marauder rolls out, for some reason you can't pay for it, that stinks a lot. So you just get it back, you take your ambush, then you can drop an Entourage. For the upgrades, I have 2 Black Sun Blaster Pistols. I already talked a lot about why I like that. Enfys Nest Electro Ripper is a really great card, especially on Enfys. I did have an incident this last week on Monday Night Dice where I didn't, you get in your head that Watto's dice can't be removed. Well, Watto's dice are only protected against events. They're not protected against card effects like this one. So I actually lost a Watto die that I needed to this special when I was playing against this deck because I wasn't paying attention. So this Enfys Nest Electro Ripper is a very, very good card, and it's got pretty big damage sides on it even if you don't hit the special. For supports, no-brainer, especially in this deck, we're going with the Scoundrel package. 2 Entourage, 2 Fickles, 2 Hireds. That one's really a no-brainer. So for events, let's start with the 2 heroes I'm bringing, which is Easy Pickings and Flee the Scene, ones I already mentioned that are pretty strong. Flee the Scene, I think we're seeing that the drawback of that card is really not that big when you can play into it at certain times. Removing 2 dice is just, any 2 dice is great. Passing stinks, but if you can play around it, I think generally it's not that major of an impact. For the villain cards, I have Active Cruelty ×2 and Take Flight. The reason I like Active Cruelty is because, again, you're dealing that indirect with the Marauders that are going to go on the characters that you're not targeting, and Active Cruelty can just kind of help wipe the board a little bit. And then Take Flight, I like the ambush on Take Flight. Eric last week was actually playing 1 Take Flight and 1 Deja Vu, and he was able to take flight, that worked pretty well. To round out the package, we have Entangle, which is a fantastic card. Usually the only problem on that card is spotting yellow. Not a problem in this deck. We have Electroshock, Emulate to help flip. And then I'm playing For a Price as well, which lets you flip a character die to a side showing a cost. Pretty effective in this deck. Indifferent, of course, spot a neutral to move a die, any die. Rendezvous, that helps you pay for a pay side that you maybe can't. And then, so Take Flight, that rounds it out. So with this deck, this is a pretty vanilla deck list. I think there's a couple slots that you could play around with if you wanted. But this deck's looking pretty good, and this is more of just a standard vanilla Enfys Marauder deck. All right, next I want to talk about something Symbio's been running. He's been running Yoda with 2 Enfys Marauders. He has been playing it on Watto's shop. I think you're going to see me playing Theed in all the decks that I'm talking about today, because I think that I've seen the Enfys Marauder get stuck out there with a pay side too many times, and the ability to have Theed to just take it off. Granted, you're not dealing the indirect, you're not getting the bonus out of it, but it still gets you the money that you may need. And you can always, of course, take another die away to pay for the Enfys Marauder dice, right? So again, with Black Sun Pistol, I went for upgrades. I went with Black Sun Pistol because I think it's really great. I also went with Treasured Lightsaber because it's a great upgrade that lets you draw a card, and it has that special with Yoda. For support, again, running the Scoundrel package, shocker, right? Entourage, Fickle, and Hired. And then for events, I have Emulate again. Again, I'm playing 2 of those Marauders, so I want to be able to flip it to the money side first turn if I want it. And then, of course, when you combine Emulate with For a Price, you basically have 4 cards in your deck that will let you flip a die to a side that you want on turn 1. So between Emulate and For a Price, I'm pretty much guaranteed that I can get the 2 money for 1 on at least one, if not both of my characters turn 1 without necessarily having to use a Yoda special. So I have Emulate, Easy Pickings, Entangle, Flee the Scene, Into the Garbage Chute, For a Price. What I am doing here, this was actually Symbio's idea, which I liked a lot. Forsaken is fantastic with these guys. That's the villain include that we're using here. Again, you have blue, you have Yoda, so you can bring that to the table. You're having a lot of times we just have 1 die in the pool because Enfys Marauders only have 1 die. So I think that's pretty useful here. Then I have Rendezvous and 2 Scruffy, because playing without Scruffy in today's environment, if you can include it, I think is crazy. So what I really like about this deck is not just the Scoundrel package, but I've got the Black Suns and I've got the Treasureds out there just to put on a little extra pressure. So you're not limited just to drawing the Scoundrel package, because it's only 6 cards, and you're really counting on Entourage to be able to anchor that. And if you don't get an Entourage, you can just see the deck fall apart. So we're trying to give it a little extra room with the Treasured Saber and the Black Sun so that we can start getting things going. I don't think this deck has a problem with money. And in that case, once you get the Black Suns, hopefully they're either on this, at the end of the game, hopefully they're on Yoda. Probably people took Yoda out. But, those are 2 pretty strong upgrades to be finishing the game with. All right, the next deck, there is a villain side to it as well, a villain option 2. In this case, and I'm not showing the list yet, I will in a second, I do think that the hero version of this deck that I'm about to show is better than the villain option. And the reason really just boils down to the R2 Astromech. Okay, so let's go through the deck list, and then we'll talk about how I want to play it. So it's kind of a Shadowcaster deck. I'm actually calling it the FireCaster, because what it's running is, so it's Elite L3, Rebel Engineer. So it's basically the Shadowcaster build out, except that I'm running them 1 Marauder in it. And that 1 Marauder lets me run Fire Spray. Okay, so it's L3 Elite, Rebel Engineer, 1 Enfys Marauder, Armored Reinforcement, of course, and then Theed Palace, again, because you need that money so bad first turn when you're playing the Shadowcaster type deck, right? For upgrades, we have the R2 Astromech. In this case, I'm running the Artcaster. I think that generally doesn't get seen much in the Shadowcaster traditional deck, but again, I'm running Fire Spray here as my main attack option. So the Fire Spray lets you power action to put down a mod for free. And then we have the triple laser turret, which is obvious, or an obvious include. For supports, I have 1 Fire Spray and 1 Shadowcaster. I do like the ability in this deck that I've seen Shadowcaster decks too many times lose their Shadowcaster and then basically just reach across the table and GG it. I'm going to go with Fire Spray first most of the time here, but you then have your Shadowcaster as a backup, and the Shadowcaster is a hell of a backup, right? Running 2 Suppressive Fire for obvious removal. Then we just go into basic events. Really, this deck is very, very, very similar to the Shadowcaster from that point. You have 2 flanks. I like 2 sudden impacts just because we're seeing a lot of 3 wides. Automated defense, right? Great removal. L3 is a droid and she doesn't go away. Automated defense is always on, spot a droid. I'm running 1 electromagnetic pulse, 2 garbage chutes, 2 field medics, 2 pickings, 2 logistics just for that first turn money, 2 rendezvous to flip again to the money side, to resolve a yellow die showing a pay side for free. The Shadowcaster or the Fire Spray has one as well as the Marauder. So I think Rendezvous is useful all game. Running Scruffy as well. I just said that I think you're crazy if you're not running Scruffy, and you can. And then 1 Vandalize. So again, the general theory of this deck is that you are going to pull out your Fire Spray first and then get the mods on that for free. So what you're really trying to do here is just use the R2 Astromech for the reset, right? It's basically what we used to do in like the Sienna Beckett reset deck until Sienna got nerfed. You're just trying to put the money in and reset the Fire Spray and drop stuff on it for free and make it a beast. It's slightly different than the Shadowcaster in that what you're trying to do on the Shadowcaster is use the Engineers to get a ton of mods on it so it just becomes a free die. And then of course you'll reset it if you can. But the Fire Spray here I think can bring a lot of potent dice to the table. You could also, depending on what teams you're playing matched up against, you could pull the Shadowcaster as well. If you're playing like a 3 or 4 wide, you may want to go with the Shadowcaster instead, just because Sudden Impact then becomes so much more potent. And remember, again, with Sudden Impact, you don't even have to have the mods on that 6 side or the 5 side to do 3 to everybody, because you only have to have 1 for Sudden Impact. You don't have to pay for the die. You're not resolving the die, you're removing it. So even if you have no mods on the Shadowcaster, the 5 and the 6 can still hit everybody for 3. So I think if you're playing a wide, you maybe risk going the Shadowcaster versus this Fire Spray. If you're playing a 2 wide, I think you go Fire Spray all day long, right? Because they're also going to be far less likely to vandalize you, so you're going to get more bonus out of your Fire Spray. So this is kind of this is kind of a cool little deck that I want to try out. I will probably be bringing it next week or the week after. So again, the reason I think this is better than the villain version is in order to get the Astromech, as we know, is very key to this deck for the resets. And the villain version would have to run 2 Marauders in order to get the chance to get the Astromech, right? Meaning like you'd want to run 2 Astromechs. So you'd have to run 2 Marauders to get the 2 Astromechs. So that's why I think this deck is actually better than the villain versions, because the 2 Astromechs you can just throw in. You only need the 1 Shadowcaster because you're ARing for it, you only need the 1 Fire Spray because you're ARing for it. So I think you can run it with just 1 Marauder. It does get you 1 more health overall. You lose a couple tricky cards from the not having the second Engineer, being able to spot 2 reds, Motivate being the key one. But I think this deck's got a chance. So, all right, viewer question of the day. I've been noticing that Aphra decks are not doing as well, I think, as I expected them to do. I had a really neat 3-die Aphra deck that I came up with. I might talk about it in a future episode, but basically it used single-die Aphra, single-die Watt, and single-die Messenger with double down so that I could get out the droids that I wanted more dependable. And I thought that was going to be like the deck of the meta, and I just got thwomped. So question for you guys is, how's Aphra doing? Is she meeting your expectations? What am I missing? Because Aphra seems like she should be doing pretty good, but I don't know if just because we're in big aggro and the Aphra damage that Aphra is doing to herself is just trouncing her or what. But let me know your guys' thoughts below. Pretty much what I'm looking at for the week coming forward is I will hopefully be able to make the Gongai one. That one's in flux, but looking at Monday Night Dice. So Mike's the TO for Monday Night Dice. He has put in an interesting restriction this upcoming week. It's essentially it's not a banned list, it's a restricted list. So there's a number of cards on there. Let me think if I can think of them. So it's No Answer, Entourage, Fist, and I believe there's one other card on there that he's only allowing you to include 1 of in your deck when you arrive. So trying out kind of the restricted list that some other games have done in the past. So we'll see how that goes. So we'll be shooting videos from that next Monday. I'll be posting them all next week, and you can watch the videos and enjoy. So pretty much that's all I have for today. So again, if you like what we're doing here, we do appreciate you watching. Please give us a like, please give us a subscribe, and if nothing else, go Commando.